The global elites have been in control of our world for centuries. They are now more powerful than ever before, but their days of ruling over us cattle are numbered. They have grown arrogant and out of touch with reality. Their goal is to establish a totalitarian one-world government and rule over all of us. To achieve this goal, they use deception, manipulation, and brute force to keep us divided and distracted. But what if we could expose their methods? What if we had a way to cut through the lies and propaganda that they use to control us and see the truth of their agenda? That would be a terrifying thought for the global elite. We will go into how our government is engineering disasters like pandemics and wars to manipulate our emotions and responses. We will go into the latest psychological operations being conducted by governments and other organizations. And finally, we will show you how you can fight back and protect yourself from these attacks. If you want to learn more about how the global elites plan to enslave us, then make sure to subscribe to my channel. There's no doubt that the state has a lot of power. Just think of all the things that it can do, from passing laws to taxing its citizens. The state can also use its power to control people's minds, which is why it's important to be aware of the tactics that it might use to try and do so. Some common tactics that the state might use to control people's minds include propaganda, censorship, and brainwashing. By understanding these tactics, people can better protect themselves against them and maintain their independence of thought. Propaganda is one of the most common ways that the state tries to control people's minds. Propaganda is simply the use of communication to promote a particular political cause or point of view. It often involves the use of biased or misleading information and is designed to influence people's opinions and behaviors. The state can use propaganda in a variety of ways, such as through the media, education, and public events. For example, the state might use the media to promote a particular political viewpoint, or it might use education to instill certain values and beliefs in the next generation. Another tactic that the state might use is censorship. This is simply the suppression of speech or other types of expression that are deemed undesirable or threatening. The state can use censorship to control the flow of information and ideas in society and to prevent people from expressing opinions that are critical of the state. For example, the state might censor the media to prevent the publication of stories that are critical of the government, or it might censor public events to prevent people from speaking out against the state. Finally, the state might use brainwashing to control people's minds. Brainwashing is the process of influencing someone's thoughts, attitudes, and beliefs to the point where they are no longer able to think independently. The state can use brainwashing in a variety of ways, such as through the media, education, and propaganda. For example, the state might use the media to promote a particular narrative, and then use education to reinforce that narrative. As you can see, the state has a variety of tactics that it might use to control people's minds. It is important to be aware of these tactics so that you can better protect yourself against them and maintain your independence of thought. One way to do this is to be a critical thinker. Critical thinking is the ability to analyze information objectively and to form your own opinions based on the evidence. It also involves being aware of your own biases and the biases of others. When you are a critical thinker, you are less likely to be influenced by propaganda, censorship, and brainwashing. Another way to protect yourself from the state's attempts to control your mind is to be well informed. This means staying up to date on current events and being aware of the different perspectives on issues. You should also be aware of the tactics that the state might use to control people's minds. The more you know, the better equipped you will be to protect yourself. Finally, it is important to be independent. This means being willing to think for yourself and not just accepting what the state or other authorities tell you. It also involves being open to different perspectives and being willing to change your opinion when presented with new evidence. By following these tips, you can better protect yourself from the state's attempts to control your mind and maintain your independence of thought. You must be extremely careful when it comes to sharing information. Before you share anything, ask yourself 3 questions. Is this true? Is this necessary? And is this kind? If you can answer yes to both questions, then it's probably okay to share. However, if you're really not sure if something is true or if it's not necessary or kind to share, then it's probably best to err on the side of caution and just not share it. If you're not sure if something is true, do some research to try to verify it. There are many tools available to help you determine the validity of information. Use them. Also remember that even if something is true, it may not be necessary or kind to share. Consider the potential consequences of sharing information before you do. In today's world, it seems like every day brings with it a new crisis or disaster. Pandemics, wars, natural disasters, economic collapse, food shortages, and terrorism. These events can understandably cause fear and anxiety, especially when they are used by those in power to manipulate us into doing what they want. It can feel like we are living in a never-ending cycle of fear and uncertainty. But what if there is a method behind this madness? What if those in power are orchestrating these crises to keep us in a constant state of fear and control? This may sound like a conspiracy theory, but there is evidence to suggest that it may be true. Take the COVID pandemic, for example. Many experts now believe that the virus was engineered in a lab and released intentionally to create chaos and control. The war in Ukraine is also strange, with some believing that it was started intentionally to distract us from other issues. These are just two examples, but there are many others. Food shortages, for example, have been linked to the war in Ukraine. Despite the fact that Ukraine does not produce enough food to feed its own people, this suggests that the war is being used as a cover to create artificial food shortages. Then there is the Nord Stream pipeline explosion, which some believe was caused by a remote signal sent by a U.S. military sonar. This is just one example of how those in power may be using advanced technology to create chaos and control us. What should we do about this? One of the first steps we can take is to become more aware of what is going on around us. We need to pay attention to the news and be aware of the events that are unfolding in our world. We also need to be aware of the language that is being used to describe these events. Often those in power will use euphemisms and other language tricks to hide the truth from us. For example, the word terrorism is often used to describe acts of violence carried out by non-state actors. However, the same word is rarely used to describe acts of violence carried out by state actors. This is a subtle way of hiding the truth from us, and we need to be aware of it. Once we are more aware of what is going on, we need to start questioning everything. We cannot simply take at face value everything we hear or read. We need to question the motives of those who are reporting the news, and we need to look for evidence to support their claims. We also need to be aware of confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance. These are two cognitive errors that can lead us to believe what we want to believe rather than what is true. Confirmation bias is the tendency to seek out and interpret information in a way that confirms our existing beliefs. Cognitive dissonance is the state of having two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values. For example, someone who believes that the government is always honest and trustworthy may find it difficult to accept evidence that suggests otherwise. We need to be aware of these cognitive errors and make sure they do not cloud our judgment. Becoming more aware of the tactics that those in power use to control us is also important. As we have already discussed, they use fear and uncertainty to keep us in check. They also use language to manipulate us and control our thoughts. We need to be aware of these tactics and resist them. One way to do this is to learn about rhetoric and persuasion. By understanding how language is used to persuade us, we can better protect ourselves from those who would use it to manipulate us. It is also important to cultivate a sense of skepticism. We need to be skeptical of those in power and their motives. We also need to be skeptical of the information that is presented to us and question everything we hear or read. Finally, we need to be more independent thinkers. We need to be able to think for ourselves and not simply follow the crowd. We also need to be willing to stand up for what we believe in and not be afraid to speak out against those in power. If you want to learn more about the global elite and their plans for the future of humanity, then you should definitely check out my other videos. I would love to have you in my community. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.